Welcome back to Radically Rethinking Railways in Australia with your host, the Mad Professor. We start today's episode in the best place for it, the Republic of Singapore. Singapore is renowned for getting its job done exactly as they planned. The airport is world famous, as is the local rail system. It's because of their strength in public policy. We can see countries on a different transport footing from ours, but we don't know why. If we look for the root cause of the failure of Australian railways, we can start with public policy. Public policy is how governments make decisions that affect all of us. It is the hidden mechanism inside the black box. There is nothing scarce about public policy failures in transport around the world, nor are such public policy failures rare in Australia. Public policy failures in the United States of America, for example, are far more serious and not confined to transport, but also health and education. Surprise, surprise, countries that tend to get transport right also get matters like health or education right, which is why we see countries like Singapore or Finland starring. The Mad Professor spends a lot of time researching rail around the world, as well as digging into our libraries and archives to see what we have done. We will take a brief look at high-speed rail and why Australia doesn't have it. Morocco does. Morocco is at best a medium-income country, a phrase we use to mean it is much poorer than Australia. Each Moroccan earns about $3,000 per year. That's about 1/20th of what each Australian earns. Yet Morocco has high-speed rail, so money can't be the reason. But let's look closer. The line from Tangier to Casablanca is simply built and technically good enough. It cost 20 billion dirhams. That's maybe 3 billion Australian. It was built with French help, money, technology and skills. The model of TGV given to Morocco was not the latest, fastest or sexiest. In one sense, a mix of foreign aid and state aid by the French to their own firms. Morocco got a cheap, fast and good enough high-speed rail. It also has the kernel of a future high-tech rail industry with training of its key people. It is not everything. Other big cities like Fez and Marrakesh have yet to benefit. In scale, it would be like our Sydney to Canberra proposal called Speed Rail from the late 1990s, which was canned. Your Mad Professor has a copy of the full government file. It was canned because of angst in government. It might actually cost some money. Instead, we might have sought a sweetheart deal like the Moroccans did. But we never did ask. We too could have taken a Moroccan package from France or Spain or Japan. Not the latest model, a project that would just be a state subsidy to those countries' firms. But of course, we never ask. In public policy terms, doing what Morocco did is try something better than the old way. The old way is to get your transport ministry to put up and plan or beg for money. But the Moroccan way involved foreign and trade ministries and brought results. Maybe the approach is colonial or gave few benefits in skills or technology transfer. This Mad Professor cannot judge from here, but at least they have their high-speed train. Public policy experts have looked at public policy in different ways. How much of public policy is developed by systems or institutions versus whether it is centralised or decentralised.
hierarchical, or organic. Let's look at two contrasting types of policy development: rational policy and muddling through. One question is whether it responds to concrete goals. In other words, rational actors set goals for what government should be doing, and then make plans to reach these goals, with evidence and action directed that way. This is rational policy development. The alternative, coined by Charles Lindblom, is muddling through. This describes public policy as incremental, seemingly random, not always able to reach any goal by way of a specific plan. You know the difference when you see it. We laugh at muddling through because we've all seen it. We've seen it on the 1970s British sitcom Yes Minister. We've seen it on the ABC show Utopia. We even recall Otto von Bismarck, German Chancellor, reminding us to never look at sausages being made, nor at governments making policy. In our representative democracy, people get upset at endless government reports, consultants whose actions are not taken but cost a mint. And when things are finally delivered, they are years late and over budget. Some hanker for dictators who can supposedly get the trains to run on time. But are these failures any different from failures in health or education or other portfolios of government? We need to ask them, what is the objective of a country's public policy? The simplest answer is to improve everyone's welfare through best use of natural gifts, of capital, labour, natural resources. We see countries ahead of the pack using the simplest of measures, whether it is their focus on industrial development in Korea or sustainability in Norway. We see countries like Australia that struggle with public policy. We see countries that are beginning to fail, like the United States and the United Kingdom. That's a dramatic thing to say, so let's back it up. American life expectancy has recently fallen by 3 years. Their political party system and electoral systems have failed. Most people who voted for the losing party at the last election believed the election was rigged. And even then, the elections that did happen delivered literal idiots to power. The UK has stuck barriers to its own exports when it left the EU. Structural reasons for why all these things are happening are far too complex for this video, but we will touch on some of them that impact rail. In Australia, our biggest problem is federal-state relations, and the biggest problem in federal-state relations is taxing and spending. Our state governments are responsible for providing the services we need for daily life: school, health, and of course transport. While the federal government is there for longer-reaching things: defence, the economy, and so on. But rail has always needed vast sums of money, mainly as capital, sums that only the federal government can raise. And federal governments deliberately stop state governments borrowing through the Loans Council, a process that began when foreign loans in the 1930s were becoming impossible to repay. The trend in economics to using markets for everything led some in the policy space to think about how the same principles, that is, a decentralised system, would provide good results in policy. The idea is, this system would automatically move to a consensus position within the rules. For example, public policy could reflect the popular will on taxing and spending, and a winning political party could implement this will. For this to work, the system has three parts. There is a political mechanism to represent the popular will in Parliament. There is a bureaucratic mechanism, permanent employees who are there to implement this popular will. Finally, there is a legal mechanism, who are there to ensure the rules are being followed. In failing states, like the United States of America and the UK, these mechanisms are starting to not work. In struggling states, like Australia, these mechanisms are still work. but must carry an extra load. Examples of public policy failure are where obviously needed public infrastructure is not only not being delivered, but is being actively fought over in the political realm. There is no consensus at a political or bureaucratic level. Where there is no consensus, policy becomes shallow. Parties can't fight over substance, they can only fight over symbolism. In the short term, voters can remove bad governments, but in the long term, the system itself starts to stink. The case for improvement of public transport is absolutely open and shut. The case for improving efficiency of public transport is also very strong. The recent industrial dispute in New South Wales Railways shows this can't be taken for granted. The unions are complaining about a new train they don't like, which is not the first time, but also about their pay and the fact that they don't like the party in power. You can't therefore work out which is the real dispute, or whether the dispute has mutated from a simple one to a complex one. At the national level, the fights are over taxing and spending, but they are not real. People who complain government spends too much get elected and then spend too much themselves. And people who don't complain about this instead won't spend as if they did mean it. At the state and city level, governments are there for service delivery, and good governments make sure they deliver good services. Bad governments focus on symbolic things. You can tell the current crop of Liberal oppositions can't get elected because they are not interested in service delivery, even when Labor makes it easy by doing it badly. That service delivery covers the main areas of health, education and transport. And this third one includes both road and rail, which use a lot of physical capital. Finally, there are local governments, who are supposed to keep themselves to the 3 R's: roads, rates and rubbish, but stray into intensely capitalised areas like property development, where their lack of skills ends in corruption, and symbolic things like sister city relationships that take away what little credibility they still had. Some case studies to help us see public policy process done well, and not quite so well, are the Perth Metronet and the Melbourne Suburban Rail Loop. The key to success is that you need to plough that field long before you sow the seed. In Perth's case, a strong bureaucracy ensured the planning and analysis required to go into making the case for suburban rail was done years before by the bureaucracy. Influential people in that bureaucracy, as well as academics like Peter Newman, influenced the politicians. People like the recently retired Alana McTiernan and Premiers Jeff Gallop and Mark McGowan. So much so that when the money tree did start dropping dollars during the resource boom, the system was well placed to plan and deliver expansion. We need politicians to reflect the popular will, but we do not need them to paint anything more than broad brush strokes for a transport plan. Visitors can see one consistent and streamlined approach to expanding the network, and it has popular support despite the disruption and expense. Finding popular support for rail projects is not hard. Melbourne has suffered and continues to suffer from policy at cross purposes, even as large projects such as the Melbourne Metro Tunnel, Airport Rail and Suburban Rail Loop are being built. The last has copped strong headwinds. Dan Andrews, the Premier, according to the story, planned this line on the back of a beer coaster with his mates in consulting firms. That's his right. Nothing in the public policy textbooks prevents the political leader from coming up with a plan, nor from seeking advice from his consulting friends. But we can see the warfare within the bureaucracy that results if you don't plough that field well before. Finance bureaucrats are always going to complain about the cost. Economic development and urban planning bureaucracies probably won't object if the project stimulates development and renewal. But where does the transport bureaucracy stand? when their jobs are whisked from under them. And if the project is well executed, it reflects poorly on them and their 180-year-old defunct rail system. So they leak their gripes to the anti-Labor press. Both the Murdoch and Costello media have attacked Labor, Murdoch for the cost, but Costello, who represents a strain of upper middle class people who think they are entitled to be the thought leaders, not for what it costs, but who got to make the decision. So their gripes are that it is a bad project because they didn't think of it. And even if they had, Andrews may not have asked these people. We see good rail projects when the transport bureaucracy is not involved. The ski tube in New South Wales, or the mining railways of the northwest, even the sugarcane railways of Queensland. These railways were not run by the government rail systems, who ran their own ones for 150 or more years, and it shows. We are seeing a shift away from allowing the transport bureaucracy to run even the more conventional rail systems. Sydney Metro and the Suburban Rail Loop are good examples. Another is Tasrail, a small operation that was once the legacy Tasmanian Government Railways, but it is now so devoid of staff, track and trains that it can behave like a small mom-and-pop American railway, which they call short lines, running the trains to suit itself, not the politicians, the bureaucrats, or the population. The consequence of muddling through is that some bureaucrats cannot achieve what they want directly. For example, a Treasury department might notice a railway is overstaffed, but they cannot sack the staff themselves, so they institute policies like privatisation or competition policy. This was the rage in the 1990s. The railway is then forced to enact staff losses to meet those Treasury demands. There are even milder versions, like capital asset charging, where Treasury pretends the railway is an investment, then charges the railway an amount of money based on the current interest rate for borrowing their assets. These are, at the end of the day, just accounting tricks, but it allows Treasury bureaucrats, who fancy themselves the government bookkeepers, to enact policies they have no power to implement directly. Some people, including rail enthusiasts and transport advocates who should know better but have drunk that Kool-Aid, believe these policies actually matter. They want to see the how that drives the policy while ignoring the who and the why. So can we build a public policy process that rivals Singapore? Is this a meritocratic fantasy even worth entertaining? Meritocracy has its own embedded assumptions. Some jobs are better than others, but these will be few and should be done by the best people, and we can somehow identify these people accurately, or never be corrupted or manipulated in our choices, while at the same time being fair to everyone. Do we even know the best options? There is a thing called path dependency. We are where we are because of choices made by our forebears, and many of these choices were bad and wrong. Rail is replete with such choices. The Irish comedian Al Roach would tell the joke about lost tourists in a small village looking for the road to Dublin. They ask a local, who says,
"If I were wanting to go to Dublin, I'd not be starting from Hare."
And so it is with public policy with railways. If you were wanting rational policy, you wouldn't be starting from here. Except that's the only place you can start. Planning a new railway on a map displays this problem perfectly. There are some choices, that scalability, for example, to build one track at the start or two. You can probably put the second track in later if you make the wrong choice to just have one, though it'll probably cost you more and take longer. But choosing the route of the railway may forever exclude other better options, because towns and suburbs will grow up around that railway, and because the cost of every other option may later rise to unaffordable levels. But that is a simple planning problem. In administration, what do we do if, like Tasrail, we have closed much of our network and it can't come back? The railway into Hobart has closed, and the bridge at Bridgewater across the Derwent River, a very wide river, will likely be removed, Removing it might have some small benefit, but having to put it back later will likely have an extremely high cost, likely too high for it ever to happen. This is a path-dependent decision, and the legacy sticks in the public mind. Do you want much of the remaining Australian rail network to close? This mad professor thinks that you could carry more passengers better and cheaper by closing much of the network and replacing it with a well-designed and built high-speed rail network. The cost would be extreme, but the benefit would be great. That cost would be one blocker, but the real blocker is public reaction to closing the existing railways, even if you can prove to people they are better off. In Singapore, the old conventional railway to Johor in Malaysia has been closed and removed south of Woodlands. How could a country so dependent on railways close one like this? Easily, because the urbanised south is linked with Woodlands by several high-quality modern metro lines, and high-speed rail via a new line is on the cards. The old corridor has been saved as a bicycle path and could plausibly be reinstated, but Singapore has the right idea. Don't dwell on the old, but give people the new railways they need today. That is what you do when you don't muddle through, but set national goals. Recruit people to do them on merit, using data and evidence. I'll leave it to you to think how likely that is here. Next time, we will look at another false narrative that people use to hinder railways in Australia: population and density. See you then.